The Shadow of Vengeance, a Monte Cristo tale. Chapter 1. The call to arms. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, amber shadows across the Seine as Edmond Dantes, the Count of Monte Cristo, stood at the window of his study. The flickering light of the fireplace played upon the dark oak paneling of the room, illuminating shelves of leather-bound tomes, relics of his victories, and the map-strewn desk that chronicled his travels across the world. Though Edmond had long since avenged the betrayals that had robbed him of years of his life and his love, the weight of those years never fully left him. Peace had been elusive, arriving only in fleeting moments of solitude or in the rare companionship of those who understood him. Letters from old acquaintances arrived regularly, some seeking aid, others redemption. Edmond, while maintaining his aloof demeanor, often extended his hand to those in need, knowing well the cost of neglect. But that day, a letter seized his attention like no other. The seal was black, the wax imprinted with the sigil of an eagle, a mark Edmond recognized instantly. It belonged to Heinrich Schreiber, a man he had met during his travels in Germany. Heinrich was a principled officer in the Prussian army, one of the few Edmond had called a true friend. Together, they had shared discussions of justice, honor, and the burden of command. Breaking the seal with deliberate care, Edmond unfolded the parchment. The words within were sparse but carried the weight of desperation. Edmond, I write to you not as a count but as a man. My life is forfeit, but my honor must not die with me. 3 officers have orchestrated my downfall, accusing me of treason, murdering my family, and staining my name. Justice is out of reach here. I beg of you, avenge me. The letter trembled slightly in Edmond's hand as he continued reading. The missive ended with a final scrawl, its hurried nature evident. They will strike again. Stop them. Enclosed was a lock of hair, charred at the edges. Edmond recognized it as belonging to Heinrich's young daughter, Elise, whom he had met during a visit to Schreiber's estate. The implications were clear. She had perished in the fire that Heinrich alluded to. Edmond crushed the letter in his hand, his jaw tightening. Though he had sworn to leave revenge behind, the bonds of friendship demanded his intervention. Heinrich had been a good man, a rare soul who had shown Edmond kindness and camaraderie. Edmond owed him a debt that could not be ignored. The following morning, the Count stood on the deck of his schooner, the Revenge, as it sliced through the waves toward Bremen. Behind him, his trusted steward, Bertuccio, watched silently, understanding the storm that brewed within his master. For Edmond, vengeance was no longer a desire but a duty. Chapter 2. The puppeteers of Malice. Germany greeted Edmond with cold winds and colder truths. Through careful inquiries, discreet bribes, and the network of spies he maintained across Europe, he pieced together the story of Heinrich's downfall. The plot was as sinister as it was calculated, orchestrated by 3 men, Colonel Albrecht von Kaiser, Major Dietrich Moller, and Captain Franz Engel. Colonel von Kaiser was a man of ambition and cunning, a rising star in the Prussian army. He had orchestrated Heinrich's framing, planting false evidence of treason and ensuring that the accusations gained traction. Von Kaiser's motive was clear. Heinrich's opposition to a series of military reforms had threatened the colonel's plans for greater personal power. By eliminating Heinrich, von Kaiser had not only removed an obstacle but also created an example for others who might challenge him. Major Dietrich Moller was the colonel's enforcer, a man whose loyalty was secured through promises of wealth and influence. Known for his brutality, Moller had executed von Kaiser's orders without question, personally leading the raid that destroyed Heinrich's estate and slaughtered his family. His reputation as a merciless soldier made him feared by subordinates and peers alike. Captain Franz Engel, the youngest of the trio, was the most insidious. A master of charm and deception, Engel had been the one to plant the seeds of Heinrich's alleged treason in the minds of the Prussian court. His charisma and connections ensured that the lies spread quickly, leaving Heinrich with no allies when the accusations came to light. Edmond knew that confronting these men directly would be futile. They were entrenched in power, their influence extending across military and political spheres. To bring them down, he would need to dismantle their foundations one piece at a time, exploiting their weaknesses and turning their strengths against them. Edmond had done it before, and he would do it again. His first target would be Captain Engel. Chapter 3. The masked patron Captain Engel prided himself on his image as a man of sophistication and culture. He frequented the grand balls and exclusive clubs of Bremen, mingling with aristocrats and military elites. His vanity and greed were well known, traits Edmund intended to exploit. Dressed in a finely tailored German suit and assuming the identity of a wealthy French investor, Edmund attended one such ball at the estate of a prominent merchant. The room glittered with chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and cigars. Masks were the order of the evening, a tradition that suited Edmund perfectly. Introducing himself as Count Jules Messier, Edmund effortlessly charmed his way into Engel's circle. The captain, drawn to the promise of wealth, invited Edmund to his table, eager to discuss potential business ventures. Over the course of the evening, Edmund spun a tale of immense profits from a secret arms deal between French and German military suppliers. Engel, his eyes alight with greed, leaned closer, asking probing questions. Edmund played his part flawlessly, offering just enough detail to whet Engel's appetite while withholding enough to keep him intrigued. Over the following weeks, Edmund continued to cultivate Engel's trust, staging clandestine meetings and presenting forged documents that suggested massive financial rewards. Engel's arrogance blinded him to the trap being laid. When Edmund presented him with a contract implicating him in a conspiracy to smuggle weapons across enemy lines, Engel signed without hesitation, too focused on the promised riches to consider the consequences. The Count ensured the document was delivered to the Prussian military authorities, accompanied by anonymous testimonies that painted Engel as a traitor. But Edmund's plan went further. Through subtle manipulation, he ensured that Engel boasted of his business ventures to von Kaiser, sowing seeds of distrust between the two men. By the time the authorities acted on the evidence, Engel was already on the defensive, accusing von Kaiser of betrayal. The resulting scandal fractured the alliance between the officers, leaving Engel isolated and vulnerable. Chapter 4. The fall of a giant. Major Moller was a man of action, not words. His imposing stature and reputation as a ruthless enforcer made him a figure of fear within the Prussian army. But Edmund had discovered a chink in his armor, an addiction to opium, hidden behind his stoic facade. Disguised as a merchant dealing in rare commodities, Edmund introduced himself to Moller's supplier, gaining the man's trust through bribes and intimidation. Over the course of several weeks, Edmund replaced the supplier, ensuring that the major's addiction deepened. The opium Edmund provided was laced with a mild but cumulative toxin that clouded Moller's judgment and weakened his resolve. As Moller's dependency grew, Edmund began to unravel his public image. Using forged letters and fabricated evidence, he orchestrated a scandal that linked Moller to a foreign opium ring. At a prestigious military gala, Edmund ensured the revelation of this evidence during a speech by a prominent general. The room erupted in shock as Moller, drugged and incoherent, stumbled in his attempts to defend himself. The fallout was swift. Moller was stripped of his rank and imprisoned in the same fortress where Heinrich had been held. The irony was not lost on Edmund, who ensured that the guards treated Moller with the same cruelty the major had once inflicted on others. But Edmund's plan did not end there. He sent anonymous letters to Moller's former allies, hinting at further betrayals within their ranks. Paranoia spread like wildfire, eroding the bonds of trust that had held von Kaiser's inner circle together. Chapter 5. The Puppet Master Exposed continues with more detail about von Kaiser's psychological unraveling and ultimate downfall, expanding each scene to delve into his paranoia, his desperate attempts to maintain control, and the dramatic duel that concludes his story. Chapter 5. The Puppet Master Exposed. Colonel Albrecht von Kaiser sat alone in his study, the faint glow of a lantern illuminating maps, reports, and correspondence scattered across the large oak desk. His estate, a grand fortress perched atop a hill overlooking the city, was both his sanctuary and his prison. Von Kaiser, once the image of composure and command, now wore the weight of mounting pressures. The downfall of his co-conspirators had rattled him more than he cared to admit. The scandal surrounding Captain Engel had been a blow to von Kaiser's carefully curated network of allies. Engel's betrayal had raised questions within the ranks, and the whispers of dissent were growing louder. Worse still was Major Moller's disgrace, a debacle that had tarnished the colonel's reputation by association. Von Kaiser had defended Moller publicly, and now he bore the brunt of the humiliation. But what troubled von Kaiser most was the sense that these events were no coincidence. A shadow loomed over him, an invisible hand pulling strings and unraveling his plans. He had sent investigators to trace the origins of Engel's contracts and Moller's supplier, but the trail always ended in dead ends or led to inconsequential figures. It was as though a ghost was haunting him, a ghost with purpose and precision. In truth, Edmund had orchestrated every step of von Kaiser's descent into paranoia. Through intermediaries, he had leaked false intelligence suggesting that Engel and Moller's failures were deliberate acts to undermine the colonel's authority. Anonymous letters hinted at betrayal within von Kaiser's inner circle, further isolating him. The Count's strategy was simple: erode the colonel's confidence, sow distrust among his allies, and leave him vulnerable. Edmund also exploited von Kaiser's ambitions. The colonel had been lobbying for a promotion to general, a position that required not only military success but also political backing. Edmund, posing as a French diplomat under yet another alias, arranged for a series of misunderstandings in von Kaiser's dealings with Prussian ministers. Promised alliances fell apart, and critical endorsements were rescinded, leaving the colonel stranded in a political quagmire. But Edmund's final blow came in the form of a public challenge to von Kaiser's honor. Disguised as a member of the Prussian aristocracy, Edmund attended a military assembly where von Kaiser was set to deliver a speech. When the colonel extolled his loyalty and achievements, Edmund, speaking in an affected German accent, questioned his integrity. "Your words are bold, Herr Colonel," Edmund said, stepping forward from the crowd, "but bold words do not erase the failures of your subordinates. Tell us, what kind of leader defends traitors like Captain Engel or addicts like Major Moller?" The room fell silent. Von Kaiser's face darkened as he struggled to maintain his composure. "Who are you to question my honor?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "A man who values action over empty rhetoric," Edmund replied. "If your honor is as unblemished as you claim, prove it. Face me in a duel." The assembly erupted into murmurs. A duel was an ancient and largely forbidden practice, but the challenge struck at the heart of Prussian military culture, where personal honor was sacrosanct. To refuse would be seen as cowardice. Von Kaiser had no choice but to accept. Chapter 6. The Duel of Shadows. The appointed day dawned grey and cold, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. The duel was to take place in a secluded clearing on the edge of a forest, far from prying eyes. Edmund arrived first, dressed in black and carrying a saber that gleamed like liquid silver. Behind him stood Bertuccio, who had arranged for discreet witnesses to ensure the duel's outcome would be known, regardless of its legality. Von Kaiser arrived shortly after, accompanied by his second. The colonel wore a dark military uniform adorned with medals, a reminder of his former glory. His saber, an ornate weapon with a gilded hilt, seemed more suited for display than combat. Yet von Kaiser's grip was firm, and his expression was one of grim determination. The seconds measured the distance and ensured the terms were agreed upon: no interference, no retreat. The duel would continue until one man was incapacitated or yielded. The two men faced each other, their blades raised. Edmund moved with the precision of a predator, his every step calculated. Von Kaiser, for all his bluster, was an experienced fighter, relying on strength and aggression to overpower his opponents. The clash of steel rang out as the duel began. Von Kaiser attacked with sweeping, forceful strikes, aiming to overwhelm Edmund with brute force. But Edmund's movements were fluid and controlled, his saber darting like a viper to parry and counter. The colonel's initial confidence began to waver as Edmund's skill became evident. As the fight wore on, Edmund pressed his advantage. A quick feint followed by a thrust left a shallow cut on von Kaiser's arm. The colonel gritted his teeth, his movements growing more erratic as fatigue set in. Edmund, by contrast, remained composed, his breathing steady. Finally, with a deft maneuver, Edmund disarmed von Kaiser. The colonel's saber flew from his hand, landing several feet away in the grass. Edmund's blade came to rest against von Kaiser's throat. "It's over," Edmund said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Yield." Von Kaiser's chest heaved as he stared into Edmund's eyes. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse, but the weight of his defeat was undeniable. Slowly, he nodded. I yield, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Edmund lowered his blade but did not step back. Your crimes are known, he said. Your men have abandoned you. Your name will be remembered not for your victories, but for your treachery. Von Kaiser's face crumpled, the full extent of his ruin sinking in. Edmund left him there, kneeling in the dirt, a broken man stripped of power and pride. Chapter 7, Redemption and Legacy. With von Kaiser's downfall complete, Edmund turned his attention to ensuring Heinrich's story would not be forgotten. Through his network, he arranged for the truth of Heinrich's innocence to be published anonymously, the evidence of the colonel's schemes laid bare for all to see. The revelations shook the Prussian military, forcing reforms and purging corrupt officers from its ranks. Edmund visited Heinrich's grave in a small cemetery outside Bremen. The headstone was simple, engraved with the names of Heinrich's wife and daughter. Kneeling before it, Edmund placed a bouquet of white lilies on the grave. Rest now, my friend, he murmured. Your tormentors have paid their dues. Justice has been served. As he stood to leave, Edmund felt a sense of closure. Though he had once vowed to leave vengeance behind, he knew this act had been different. This time, he had not sought retribution for his own suffering but for the memory of a man who had embodied the values Edmund held dear. Returning to the Revenge, Edmund sailed back to France, leaving behind a Germany forever changed by his actions. Though the Count of Monte Cristo would fade from their memory, the legacy of his justice would endure, and for Edmund Dantes, that was enough.